My name is Josh Roberts, and it's been a year since I was abducted. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was walking home from school. It was about 6 p.m. and there was a full moon and a chill in the air. I stepped off the bus, and for the first time, someone else got off with me. I'd never seen this new kid at school before. I could hear footsteps behind me. I took a quick glance and saw the kid walking at a brisk pace. I thought he was following me, so I took a left, which wasn't my usual route. I looked around again and saw him take the same left. My heart started pumping and my legs started shaking at the sound of the footsteps as they got louder and faster. I then panicked and started running. I remembered a shortcut in the nearby forest to my neighborhood, so I ran as fast as my legs could carry me.
"Hey kid, wait up!"
said a heavy voice from behind me. I tried my hardest not to stumble on the logs and boulders in my path. I could hear the sound of sticks and leaves being broken by some fast, heavy footsteps. My legs started throbbing as the adrenaline wore off, so I took a detour towards a playground. I stopped to catch my breath, looking around for somewhere to hide. Then it went silent. I was doubtful that I lost him. I took my phone out to call the police when I spotted a local news article. Caution, there is a suspicious man on the loose. He escaped the local prison and assaulted an officer. Beware, he may look like a teen, but he is in his 20s. If you see him, call 911 immediately and lock your door. My mind started rushing with thoughts, and I started to panic. All of a sudden, someone started choking me with their arm. I tried to fight back, but they were so strong, I didn't stand a chance. My feelings of hope began to diminish as I slowly blacked out. I awoke to find myself in a dark, damp room that looked like a basement. The floor was hard and cold. There were no windows, but there was a staircase and a bathroom. I tried to move, but I was tied up with a thick rope.
Yeah, I got him. How much was the deal? 200?
Listen, you gotta do a little better than that. Okay, fine. You'd better bring the right amount.
Or you'll be tied up like that kid.
What? Are they selling me? The guy sounded mad and anxious with whomever he was talking to. Right after he hung up, he opened the door and walked down the stairs with an evil smile. "Let go of me!" I exclaimed as he taunted me. My arms started to fall asleep due to the tightness of the rope. He came closer to me and I spat in his face. He looked at me in sheer rage. Then the doorbell rang, followed by pounding on the door. The guy grabbed some tape and shut me up before I could scream for help. He slowly backed off, signaling me to keep quiet, and ran towards the front door. I looked around, trying to see what I could use to untie these ropes. I spotted a rusty, sharp edge sticking out of the wall. This was my one hope. I successfully got up and tried with all my might to reach it. As I was trying to cut the rope from my hands, I could hear the commotion upstairs getting heated. I managed to free myself from the ropes when I heard the front door slam. The silence was terrifying. I was frozen in fear. Footsteps started coming towards the door. I choked and shuffled back to my original position, arms behind my back, wrists tightly locked together. "Now where were we?" said the man. He walked towards me, grabbed my ankles, and started dragging me when the phone rang. He dropped me instantly and charged upstairs. I wasn't going to lose this opportunity. I untied my feet, grabbed the closest thing to me, and hid behind some boxes. "Now where did you go?" he said as he stampeded down the stairs. I heard him getting closer to where I was hiding. I bolted up from behind the boxes and saw him checking the bathroom. As he walked out, I struck him over the head with a pole. He stumbled and fell to the floor. Crimson red pooled around his head. I ran upstairs and out the front door. I stumbled my way to the closest house, screaming. A woman thankfully opened the door. She was shocked and fearful when she saw me. The police were called and I was rushed into the hospital. They're still looking for that man, even to this day.
Thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. If you would like to support the channel, check out the merch link in the video description.
I'm 24, and this happened 5 years ago when I was 19. I was conducting an online transaction on a site called Alks, which is similar to Craigslist. It's an online app where you can see items being sold by random strangers, and all you have to do is make a call and meet up. I was looking for a cheap sweater for my trip to Japan the following week. After several minutes of scrolling, I came across an ad with exactly what I was looking for. A Korean-style female fur sweater for just 300 pesos, about $6. It was perfect. I had issue with it. The meetup point was at the LRT train station at 8 p.m. because the seller was too busy at work. I decided, what the heck? It's a public place anyway. I called the owner and we had a quick convo. He sounded like a strict guy, but I asked him when we could meet up. He responded, "Tonight at 8 p.m. sharp." I said sure. But this recklessness of mine is what I regret the most. I arrived at the meeting place at 7:58 p.m. It was really empty, and I was sure I was the only person in the station. It was a cold night in November, and I eagerly awaited warming myself with my coat. Honestly, I'm the kind of girl who's comfortable wearing a sweater even when it's hot. I was sitting on a bench when the clock ticked 8 o'clock, when suddenly someone covered half of my face with a scarf with a really strange scent. I fell unconscious. As I woke up, I found myself in a van with 4 guys, my wrists handcuffed behind my back. I asked the man what they wanted and to please let me go. Tears began to fall from my eyes. But then, one of the guys touched my face and said, "It's our first time ever tasting a beautiful girl like you." I kept on crying and shouted, "Please, I want to go home, please." The guy next to me choked me, shouting that I needed to shut up. I tried to resist, but my eyes started to roll back in my head. He stopped, but it was taking a long time for me to catch my breath. I looked out the window and saw a checkpoint lane. For the first time in my life, I was so glad that the authorities had permission to check the van. But the guy next to me reached for a gun, a really big gun. Knowing this was my only chance, I found the strength to shout and cried out, "Officer, please help! They have a gun!" The 2 officers immediately grabbed their guns, one shooting at the tires, the other aiming for the man next to me. The officer shot him in the head. I never thought I'd witness such a thing in my life. One of the officers carried me out of the van, and I passed out moments later. I woke up the next day in a hospital bed. My parents were there, crying and asking me what happened. I told them the truth, that I was buying a sweater online. But I suddenly snapped. I cried and cried, saying, "Please help, please help." Since then, I've had to go to a psychiatrist to recover from mental instability and anxiety, and it should go without saying, but I never ever want to buy anything online, ever again.
This fact happened when I was 15 years old, beginning of last year, 2018, when I finally got to sophomore year here in Brazil. It was an ordinary Friday night. Suddenly, I felt a little bit hungry, so I decided to put on some clothes and go to the snack bar. It was barely 10 minutes from my house. I usually pass through the alley to go to the snack bar, but that time, everything was so creepy in there. When I was halfway there, it was dark, empty, abnormally cold and gloomy. I felt slightly intimidated, but there was nothing there that could really harm me. So I decided to just go through that alley. Then I thought, nothing's gonna happen. I kept going until I suddenly heard something weird on the other side of the alley. There was a man in there, staring at the walls in hunchback stance, grunting weirdly. I found that incredibly creepy, but I was nearly at the snack bar, so all I needed was just to get out of that alley. Walk 1 minute more and I finally would get there, instead of making it all the way home with empty hands. Thus, I decided to ignore him and pass through after all. I finally passed through him. He turned to me and stared at me with a creepy smile, which made me walk a little bit faster, trying to avoid him. Then, suddenly, I heard a grunt and quick steps behind me. When I looked back, it was him. We were barely 2 feet away from each other. He had a kitchen knife in his right hand and jumped on me with amazing speed and tried to stab me. I managed to grab both of his arms before he could get me. However, since he was charging at me, he still had more energy to push me back and force me against a wall. I was terrified with all of that. I knew I would die if I didn't fight back. Back then, I was already trained in some martial arts to defend myself, but that I thought I'd never need to use that skill to defend my life until now. So, in a sudden burst of adrenaline, I managed to twist the wrist which he was holding the knife, kicking his stomach and punching him mercilessly in the face several times. In the end, his face was bleeding so much, but his body was ignoring the pain of the blows in his body and only focusing on killing me. Finally, I used a training that I took before to twist both of his wrists and elbows harshly at the same time, forced in 2 different directions, and kicked the backside of his leg, putting him to the ground until ultimately he could drop the knife. It wasn't easy because he was struggling and punching my back and somehow trying to jump on me. But since I had his arm under my grasp, he couldn't do much without breaking himself. I slammed his head in the concrete ground, stunning him, then kept striking his face desperately while kneeling over his arm so he wouldn't be able to react or reach his knife again. Then finally, he was out cold, bleeding a lot. My knuckles were full of blood and hurt. So I got up, took his knife, throwing it far away from there, and ran away from him. I finally got to the snack bar, washed my hands in there, and did everything I had to do before going back home. But obviously, I didn't take the same path as I did before. But there were things that got much creepier. That was at the entrance of my apartment, where I heard screams coming from the other side of the street. It was the same crazy man. Now, seeming like he was possessed by a demon, and he was slamming his head on the iron door of my building's entrance. His face was horribly deformed and scarred from our fight. That freaked me out completely. My parents were on a trip, and the watchman of our building was on vacation. I wasn't going to fight that man again, so I decided to rush to my girlfriend's house. When I got there, she was home alone. She looked worried because I was looking pale, and there were still some marks of the man's blood on my clothes. I explained everything to her, and we called the police to come by my building. And when they arrived, the man was still in the entrance trying to force the doors unsuccessfully. When he saw the police, he attacked them, but got quickly dominated by the cops. They explained that he was probably a crazy psycho in the streets looking for prey to rape, kill, or do anything he wanted to the person. So they sent him to a high-security mental asylum for criminals far away from my house. I feel so lucky that I survived that day, and I'm hoping that I will never see that man again. This is not about my story, but someone from my church, and he wanted to share his experience with anyone else. He's a 32-year-old man, and his pseudonym is Mark. He's a fairly big guy, and this situation took place when he was on his way home from work. He said that he had lost his phone 1 week before this whole situation happened, so he couldn't call and get any help during this story. It was quite late, around 11 p.m. He had finished work and was walking to a taxi stop location, and when he got there, a few people were standing around waiting as well. After about 2 minutes, he noticed that there was a minivan approaching. Usually, minivans are cheaper than taxis, and he felt tired that day, so he decided to take the minivan. He sat on a seat, and there was a young boy seated in the passenger side next to the driver who was collecting the fare. And then, 2 other boys who looked like teenagers also boarded the minivan and sat in the seats in front of him. Once the minivan took off, after about 5 minutes, the boy asked if they would like to drink some Coke. The boys accepted and started drinking. And they also gave it to Mark. Mark was also feeling thirsty, so he took it, but only a sip. Not much later, he started feeling drowsy. Just before he about laid his head on the seat beside him, he noticed that those two boys were already knocked out. After he laid his head down, he heard noises coming from the back seats. Two people were talking in a different language. The car was passing a big signboard that showed Crest Chicken Farm. And then he finally passed out. When he got up, he found himself inside a big shed-like barn, and there were some tools on a big table. He was on the floor, and the other two teenage boys were laying next to him. He still felt a bit drowsy, but he managed to get himself up as he was looking for an escape. He saw that the two boys were still passed out, so he tried waking them, but they wouldn't budge. As Mark was kind of a big man, he tried to see if he could carry one of them, but it was hard to do because even Mark was having a hard time to stand properly. And then he heard voices. He took a peek from the door, and three people were walking toward the big shed, coming from a house on the hill, which was quite close to the shed. Mark panicked and tried to look for another exit. He was looking around the place, and he found one at the end of the shed, luckily. He approached quietly and escaped as fast as he could. At this point, his vision was all blurry, but he managed to find a fence door and unlocked it. He heard the people shouting, but he ignored. He just kept on running. When he finally reached his house, it was early morning, around 5 a.m. His wife was up all night waiting for him and ran out the front door as soon as she saw him. He collapsed and slept for almost the whole day. When he woke up and finally got a chance to explain to his wife what had transpired that night, he remembered about the other two boys who were still there. Then he contacted the police immediately. He told the police about the road signs and a big billboard for Crest Chicken Farm and other things that he could remember. About 2 weeks after, there was a police report about how they found two teenage boys' bodies in a lake and advised that when they examined the bodies, all their organs were missing. Mark just stood in fear. And as the event was too traumatic for him, Mark had to quit a job for a while.
When I was 11 years old, I spent the night hanging out with my closest friend at the time. I left around 7 o'clock. He was about 15 to 20 minute walk away from my house. It was the month of December, so it was icy and dark outside. While I was walking down the long sidewalk, I had to make a turn halfway. Across the turn down the sidewalk, I noticed a man way further down. He was alone at the moment. 10 seconds later, a 4-door car drove up to him. It was a long street till my turn, so I watched him talk to whoever it was in the car. It sped off, and he just stopped, watching me as I walked. As I kept walking, all I heard was, "Hey you, come here, stop, hey you." So I freaked out. I started walking faster and then noticed he started running toward me. I started running for my life. Since the ground was covered in snow and ice, all I literally thought was, "Please, God, don't let me slip." I was crying and I was running. He caught up extremely fast. I kept looking back and noticed the car slowly driving behind him. As I ran, I felt his arm reach out and try to grab the hood of my sweatshirt. By God's grace, his hand slipped, and I ran a block trying to find a house with the lights on. I finally found one and banged at the door, almost ready to break it down. This older couple finally answered, and I ran inside explaining what happened. The husband then went outside to try to find him. When he went out, he saw the man standing at the end of the street staring at him. Then he ran off. My mom called the police and pulled me out of school for 4 days afterward, and this guy was never found. For a while after, I would buy flowers and a card and leave it on the couple's step. thanking them for saving my life. God only knows what would have happened if he got me and dragged me to the car. When I was 15, my mother went out shopping and left me in charge of the house. It was starting to get dark and I realized my little brother was nowhere to be found. I asked my sister if she knew where he was, and she said he had gone to the park around the corner to kick his soccer ball around. I told her to watch the house while I was gone and ran off to the direction of the park. When I got there, I was surprised to find the park completely empty. I called out my brother's name, but there was no answer. I started to get worried, and all of a sudden I heard a faint muffled noise coming from my left. I turned just in time to see a tall figure disappearing behind a large fence. I sprinted as fast as I could. When I came around to the other side of the fence, I saw something that almost made me choke in horror. My little brother was being dragged down the alleyway by a tall man. I flew into a rage and tears of anger streamed down my face. I ran at him and he must have heard me coming because he turned around to face me and he dropped my younger brother. The tall man tried to grab me, but I was running at him so fast that when I slammed into him, it knocked him off his feet. He swore and tried to get back up, but I just started stomping on his face. Without stopping to ask questions, I picked my brother up and ran as fast as I could back to our house. By this time, it was pitch black outside and my mother was home. She was frantic with worry, and when she saw the look on our face, she realized that something bad had happened. As I explained, my brother and I started crying, and my mom gave us both the biggest hug ever, and she cried with us. Eventually, the police were called, but this guy was never found.
My name is Sam. It was August of 2001. I was 15 and accompanying my dad to visit his friend's new house. My dad's friend, who we call Rick, just moved into this house a few weeks ago. My dad wanted to visit and ask about renovation and decorating the place, as it was pretty old. Well, I'm English, so that means my country is full of old houses, from like the 1500s. Rick had bought an antique castle thing in a forest. I know, pretty creepy, right? Anyway, we arrived and Rick and his wife invited us in. My dad and Rick soon went off to the garage to discuss what plans were for that room. I was left alone with Georgina, Rick's wife, and their newborn baby, Rick Jr. Georgina asked me to fetch some formula from the kitchen for little Ricky. Being the good 15-year-old boy, I agreed, even if the house was home to demons. I went into the kitchen and the first thing I noticed was a trap door in the corner. Me, being curious, I opened it. A terrible smell filled the kitchen. It smelled like horse manure mixed with puke. Suddenly, a pale hand with long fingers grabbed me. I swore and started hitting the hand. Another hand grabbed my other hand and tried to drag me down. I shouted for my dad. Suddenly, purple eyes appeared from the darkness of the trap door. They stared at me. My dad rushed in, and the hands disappeared. I had scratches on my arm, and so I ran them under some cold water. My dad asked me what had happened. I said there was some demon guy in the cellar. My dad and Rick grabbed flashlights and searched the basement. Nothing was there. We called the cops who searched the property, and of course, they found nothing. When I got home, I went straight to my computer. It turns out a man was shot in a hunting accident there, roughly around 1770. But trust me, those hands weren't of a man. Rick still lives there, and over the past 18 years, there have been countless sightings and weird stuff. I just hope whoever or whatever that thing is goes away. Hi, my name is Adil, and this is a true story. The police have finished this case, and the man is in prison now. I was 14 at the time this took place. I was in a school and sitting in a history lesson that was so boring. My friend Noel, who was sitting opposite me, said I could come over on Saturday, as his parents were not going to be there because they were going on a weekend away. That meant we could stay up as long as we wanted. This was not uncommon, as we both invited each other to stay at one another's house, and I thought we were going to have a great time. Saturday came and I was so ready. I packed my essentials like my toothbrush, my new game, and my pepper spray. My parents always made me carry it, and I didn't mind because it made me feel safe too. I went on my way, and 30 minutes later, after walking, arrived to Noel's house. As he opened the door, he looked a little tense and shifty. I walked in and locked the door after me, to which he became even more anxious. I asked him if everything was all right, and he said it was. Not trying to put a down on the evening, I asked him if we could play the new game I bought. He wasn't really interested, but said yes anyway. After 30 minutes of watching him not playing and just holding the controller in his hand, I switched off the TV and asked him what was going on. To which he replied, "I need your help." I asked him what he needed my help for. He told me that this man who added him on Facebook was actually stalking him in real life, and as to how he wanted to meet Noel. He warned him that if he told his parents, he would kill them. So Noel, being the stupid idiot, he told him to come at 8 p.m., 5 minutes from now. He was scared, so he asked me to come to this meeting to get rid of him, and that if he had told me at school, I never would have agreed to come. He was right. I felt betrayed that he brought me here under false pretenses. I was also angry at his stupidity of him giving his address away as well. However, I had no time to argue. I was just glad he told me about this guy. I grabbed my pepper spray and just sat there on the couch. The doorbell rang at 8 p.m. I just sat there hoping he would leave after a little bit. However, then I started to hear scratching and realized he was breaking in with some sort of tool. I quickly ran into the kitchen with Noel and we heard the door lock get broken and someone kicked the door in. The lights were on and we were hiding behind the large fridge. The man in a deep voice shouted, "Noel!" We didn't reply. And then he shouted, "Noel, where the heck are you? I'm going to kill you." I had a plan. At this point, I pushed Noel out from behind the fridge. Noel started going back, and the man was walking forward, chuckling. As soon as he came near the distance of the fridge, I shot out and sprayed pepper spray in his eyes. He screamed in pain and then started swinging the screwdriver in his hand. I grabbed the screwdriver and picked up a pan laying there and hit him on the head. He blacked out. He was dressed in a smart suit and was clean-shaven. We called the police and later found out that he was a man who was being monitored because there were several complaints of stalking and threatening behavior. They also found many tools in a bag he left near the door that would dismember a body. Thankfully, this sicko didn't kill anyone. However, I'm now happy that Noel called me because I dread to think what would have happened if I wasn't there.
It was a typical boring day in calculus, only it was Friday, 7th period, meaning the week was almost over and spring break would finally be upon us, so everybody was getting antsy in their seats, I could tell. We didn't have a test that day like a lot of my friends did with their other teachers, so our teacher in the middle of class just decided to start playing games with us on Sporkle.com. He was a very laid-back teacher like that. As we were doing some brand logo quiz on Sporkle, I remember the exact moment it happened. Right after my friend answered a question, I remember the exact answer too, Adidas. The dean's voice came through the loudspeaker. He sounded panicked and frantic as he told all the teachers this was not a drill and to go into lockdown. I actually got the chills and I got goosebumps on my arms as our usually laid-back teacher too seemed panicked as he ran to turn off the lights and ushered us to the back corner of the room. We all sat in silence for about 2 minutes, and then the usual buzzing that came from a panel in the back of the room ceased, indicating that the school must have cut all the power. We all looked at each other, realizing this must be serious. A few more minutes of waiting later, we heard a man screaming at the top of his lungs coming down the hallway. 2 girls in the class actually started crying, which made all of us even more scared. As the screaming got closer to the classroom, the lunatic-sounding man started banging on the lockers while screaming, "I'll kill all of you." It was at that moment that I started to fear for my life. My teacher shushed us as we all looked at each other to see our peers' reactions. The banging then moved from the lockers to our classroom door. And that's when one of the crying girls screamed no. The banging on the door only grew worse as the man started screaming, "Open up." 2 of the girls in the class were crying out loud now. It felt like an eternity that man was pounding at the door, but eventually he finally continued down the hallway, screaming like a mentally insane person until we could not hear him anymore. I'd say 10 minutes later, though it felt like half an hour given the situation, the dean came back on the loudspeaker explaining the situation, which was surprising for him to do. He explained that some apparently mentally unstable person entered the building and assaulted the woman sitting at the front desk, causing her to flee the building screaming, and staff wasn't sure if the man was armed or not. Now, this was before the school had cameras or could afford proper security, so the school was wide open to something like this happening. The staff had done a sweep of all the hallways and classrooms and couldn't find him, so the dean instructed the teachers to resume teaching but to keep all the doors locked, and to not let any students leave for any reasons. The most disturbing part, however, is that one of the janitors working the night shift found the man sleeping in one of the storage closets near the back end of the school, and according to rumors that were spread by my peers, sticking out of his pocket was a .44 Magnum. The janitor must have done something stupid to wake him up, for example, leaving the closet door open, because by the time a police officer could arrive on the scene, the man was gone. My entire class, as far as I know, to this day, has no idea if this man was ever found, but I like to think that right now, he's being given the proper help that he needs.
This story took place a long time ago, back in 2002, when Craigslist was in its early years. Many wouldn't know, but back in those days, Craigslist was a lot different. It was a lot more so an online garage sale, or just a place where people would list old things that still had some value that they were willing to give away. I got a basketball hoop, a hockey net, and a spoiler for my car, all free in perfect condition in that same year. You'd be lucky if you found something like that these days. Anyway, me and my son were dying to buy a hockey net so we could practice in the cul-de-sac we lived in. For the record, this was before I got that free one I mentioned. Wouldn't you know it, on Craigslist there was an ad for a slightly used regulation-size hockey goal for only $50. It came with a puck and 2 slightly used hockey sticks. I still have a picture of that ad to this day. It seemed like the perfect deal, but he lived about 2 hours away. I called the number he had listed, and he sounded pretty normal on the phone. He had a pretty deep, dark voice, but nothing that would be off-putting. I remember his voice being a bit emotionless. He agreed to meet halfway due to the distance, said he'd put the stuff in the back of his pickup truck. He said he could only come after he got off from work though, which was much later in the day, way past dark. We agreed to meet at some rest stop off the highway. Me and my son, who was 11 at the time, took my wife's minivan, the only car that would be able to fit that huge thing. Within an hour, we were at the truck stop, which was empty at this hour, but was decently lit by 3 big light posts. I parked right under one of the lights and waited. A pickup truck pulled in off the highway right on time. He stopped right in front of me. I went over to his window, but then noticed there was nothing in the back of his truck. "You Steve?" he asked me. "Yep, that's me," I said. "Alright, my buddy's bringing in the stuff with his truck." The guy pulled up behind my car and put it in park. I suddenly had a bad feeling. I told my son to get back in the car and lock every door except mine. 2 more pairs of headlights came off the highway into the lots. surely enough, pulling up next to me. And, not surprisingly at this point, there was no hockey equipment in either one of them. My heart was racing. I was worried. Not for me, but for my young son who I for some reason brought with me on this trip. A group of large men mixed with heavy-set and muscular physiques stepped out of the 2 pickup trucks behind the first one. They eyed me from head to toe, giving that typical intimidation stare down. Then this bald guy wearing sunglasses said in a deep voice, "Where's the money?" I instantly pulled out my wallet and handed it to him, begging him to just let me and my son go. He pulled out like $100 and was pissed, expecting more. He then sent 2 of his goons or whatever to get my son. At this point I screamed and begged for him not to take him. One of the men broke the glass to the minivan back door, and I vividly remember the disturbing, heartbreaking screams of my young son. What happened next was what I can only explain to be a miracle from God answering my prayers. A car was entering the lot from off the highway. All the men stopped and turned to look at it. As it got closer, my heart literally dropped in excitement as I saw it was a police car. The lights suddenly began to flash as he got close enough to see what was going on. All of the men were back in their trucks within seconds, speeding off down the highway. Well, at least 2 of them. The truck in the back was caught immediately by the police car, and backup arrived shortly. I explained everything to them, and they got the men that were caught to rat out on the others surprisingly quickly. I guess luckily the guys in the back truck weren't very loyal to whoever their leader was, if they even had any type of leader. Believe it or not, I had a police escort all the way home to make me and my son feel safer. I don't want to get into all the legal stuff, but I'll just say that all of those men except for one was caught, and I'm pretty sure that was the driver of the first pickup truck. Needless to say, my Craigslist days weren't over at that point, but I have always been much more protective of my son, and much more cautious of Craigslist meetings since then.
When I was 23, my boyfriend and I broke up, so I was in the process of moving away from my hometown to Houston. I just wanted to start over somewhere new. It was about 3 a.m., and I was driving through a small town in Texas on my way to Houston when I decided to stop for gas. It was pretty empty, but the gas station was open. As I was filling up, looking at my phone, I saw a truck pull up to the pump on the other side of me. I wasn't paying any attention until I put my phone in my pocket to put the nozzle back, and I saw a man just staring at me. I smiled at him, turning to put the gas cap back on, when I saw 4 more men, 2 on either side. I thought that was weird, but I just wanted to get in my car and go. As I went to pull the handle on my door, they attacked me. I was screaming and kicking and fighting as hard as I could, but I wasn't strong enough. 2 of them pulled me into the back seat of the truck while 2 of them pushed me in. I ended up draped over their laps. I was still trying to get free, but it was hard to move with their weight holding me down. I started to cry. I have never felt so weak in my life. I started scratching one man thinking, if they kill me, his DNA will be under my nails. They pulled up to a motel and carried me inside of a room. I was screaming again, and the oldest looking one started hitting me, telling me to be quiet. One of them said if I was good, they wouldn't hurt me. They held me down on one of the beds and tied my hands and feet together with a belt and some kind of thin string like a shoelace. I was panicking and still crying, just telling them to let me go. I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't tell anyone, that's what I told them. They started talking to each other in another language, one I couldn't recognize. Looking around the room, I saw bags and beer cans, lots of beer cans. It smelled like they had all been staying in this one room with 2 beds for a while. I don't really want to get into what they did to me, but at some point, one of the men said they needed more beer. They decided the smallest one was going to stay in the room with me. So after the other 4 left, it was just me and the man who looked to be around my age. I remember thinking, I could probably beat him up if I get loose. I asked him if I could use the bathroom. And when he untied me, I bolted for the door. I swung the door open, and he grabbed my arm. I yelled, "Get off me," and he let go, eyes wide. I ran down the street, no clothes on, and jumped in front of the first car I saw. It was a confused elderly man. He rolled down his window and yelled, "What are you doing?" Like I was ruining his morning or something. I told him I needed help and that I was kidnapped. He drove me to the police station where I was given scrubs and could file a report. They ended up saying I needed to go to the hospital for an examination so they could record any evidence that the man may have left on me. I just wanted to shower and go home, honestly. I just wanted to talk to my mom. They found the men the same day. It turns out they were all brothers. They didn't say what they planned on doing with me after, or why they did it in the first place. They claimed to be all blackout drunk at the time. I ended up moving to the other side of the country, and even though I know they're still in prison, I get nightmares about what happened. I don't use my phone at all in public anymore, and my current boyfriend says I'm too paranoid, but I have to be, right? I never want to feel that weak again in my life.